1. I think I was 14 or something. Sorry, I can't remember that well. My memory, let's say, is spotty. Back to the story. This is when my parents and I went to the State Fair of Texas. I'm male, by the way. For some reason, me and my parents separated, or we lost each other, and I was at a landmark once again. So I look at my phone, and a few times, bobbing my head each time, every 45 seconds, I think I saw him. I think he was in his 30s, blue shirt, blue hat, just watching me. It gave me the feeling to move, and so I did. And there he was again. I moved into an event trying to lose him, but I didn't, unfortunately. After the last time trying to lose him, I had maybe a minute of a window. So I talked to a police officer and he said, "Hello, what is it?" "There's a man following me." And I don't know him. I think it was a female police officer. When I described him, she said, "Okay, wait here, sweetheart," and radioed a male police officer for backup because the dude was odd, maybe a tweaker, a person on drugs. Backup comes and he is trying to look as oblivious as possible, looking at a sign or something. Well, it failed big time. And the police officer asked him, "Why are you following a young boy you don't even know?" And then the police officer came back and said, "He is your uncle, is that true?" I said I've never seen him before in my entire life. The police officer walked up to the man and he was fucked up. Accidentally revealed a major red flag to the police officer. He was pissed off and yelling, demanding to take me back home in his white van, and playing it off like I didn't say anything. I was scared and the female officer next to me asked, "Where are your parents?" I said, "I don't know." I got out my phone and hit my dad's number. As it was dialing, I handed it over to her, and she explained where we are and everything that is happening. 2 minutes or something that feels like 2 minutes goes by, and my dad shows up and asks me if I was okay. I said yes, after verifying that this is my father. I looked back at the strange man. I saw a pissed but defeated look on his face. He was getting arrested after that. The female officer explained what stalking and pressing charges meant. I said yes. Then me and my dad found my mother, and we went on a train and went home. 2. So the first time I had a paranormal experience, I was about 5 years old. My mother and father had been split up for a couple of years. My mom had rented a 2-bedroom house with a large basement, where a family friend and roommate lived. At first, everyone thought it's just an old house, of course, it's going to make noise. But there was constant, what sounded like footsteps, that would go up and down the basement stairs and in the kitchen. My mom once told me she thought she had seen a man in our kitchen. Anyway, we moved as soon as our lease was up. When my mom had talked to the landlord, an older lady, she confided to my mom years ago her husband had committed suicide in the basement. Fast forward to when I was about 9 years old. It was a weekend, and I was at my father's house. My dad had gotten remarried, and I shared a room with my stepsister, who was 2 years older than me. My sister and I were laying down to sleep, and we usually talked until we got sleepy. She has always thought the old apartment complex my father lived in was haunted. I just thought she was trying to scare me. Until one night, both of us were woken up by crying. My sister snapped, thinking it was me telling me to shut up. We both realized neither of us were making the sound. Then we kept hearing a little girl's voice crying, "Daddy, stop it, you're hurting me." The next day we told our parents what happened, and my dad told us he's heard the same thing before. But no one ever saw the little girl. When I was about 11, my dad and stepmom moved closer to my mom's house, in a small town of southern Washington. My dad and stepmom were managers of a large 58-unit apartment complex. We lived in the house, office of the apartments. My Uncle Mark had come to help us move in. The house was 3 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, and an upstairs. My uncle was sleeping on the couch for the first few days. My sister and I were excited to get our own rooms now. I don't know why, but from day one I was scared of the upstairs. I even remember my sister trying to convince me that the upstairs was safer. If someone broke in, our uncle was downstairs and would protect us. Anyway, for the first few months in it was like this. me being terrified to sleep in my room. I had this lamp that you could change how bright my light was, and I always slept with it on. I always felt like I was being watched, and would wake up in the middle of the night like someone was in there with me, but I never saw anything. Every night I would hear footsteps going up and down the hall, but when I would go check it out, there would be no one there. My sister's room, directly across the hall from mine, she always slept with her door open, and she was passed out in bed. I walked to the end of the hall, to my dad and stepmom's room, just to hear snoring, and at that time we didn't have a dog. Later on I would talk to my dad about it, and he would tell me he would hear what sounded like footsteps too, but it was an old house. And not to worry. Eventually we got used to the noises, but I couldn't get over the feeling of being watched every weekend. A couple of years later I moved into my dad's house because my mom and I weren't getting along at all. One night, while my dad and stepmom were working late on an apartment that someone was going to view the next day, I was about 14, my sister 16, and gone at a friend's house. I was laying on the couch. My dog, a German Shepherd Ridgeback mix, was laying on the love seat on the wall to the right of the couch. I looked toward the wall opposite of the love seat. I saw a misty haze, and as I watched it became clearer. It looked like someone's upper body. I didn't see a face, but shoulders and arms were visible. My dog Misty freaked out, barking, jumping off the couch in an aggressive way. Missy is a very mild-mannered dog. I was so shaken up that I took Misty and we sat in the apartment my parents were working on, so I didn't have to be alone. I told my dad what happened, and he said he would pray over the house. He's kinda a Christian fanatic. About 6 months later, me, my dad, and Missy were watching TV in the living room. My dad and Missy on the love seat, and I was sitting on the far end of the couch that looks into the kitchen and doorway of the hall that led to the upstairs. I looked away from the TV to see a female figure standing in the kitchen. My stepmom and sister were at my sister's grandparents' house. It was really late at night, around 11 p.m. The figure leaned over the stove, then turned to me. I couldn't see any features. And then the figure walked down the hall. Missy freaked out, tearing down the hallway, barking like crazy. I told my dad what I had just seen. I walked into the kitchen, and to my surprise, the oven was preheating when my father and I had ordered pizza. Neither of us had touched the oven. After my dad told me that he had some experiences of his own. Mostly he heard the footsteps every night, and occasionally Missy would freak out barking around the house. I didn't see the figure again. We lived in the house for years after the incidents. Looking back, I feel like the woman was checking in on us while we slept, like she was taking care of us somehow. 3. Our switching was complicated in the 5th grade. I was in the 5th grade. There were 3 classes, 2 4th, 1 5th. The 4th graders learned 4th grade stuff, but the 5th graders learned 5th grade stuff. I was 11 when it happened. The year was passing by quickly. I was a really good student with straight A's, and I got all the awards. In the first class, which was science and social studies, we were studying the lost settlement of Roanoke. I looked out the window. A tall, thin, middle-aged man was standing there. He looked at me and smiled. He had brown hair and light blue eyes. He continued to walk around the school. I didn't think anything of it. I had a feeling of sadness. I don't know why. "Is there something outside you would like to share with us, Cheesy Wheezy?" Mrs. Spiral Butts asked. "No," I say. When it was time to switch to my next class, which was math class, I saw the man approaching the school. My math teacher, Mrs. Sassafras, had a habit of being, well, sassy. Mrs. Sassafras was our permanent sub. Mrs. Lavallamp, our real teacher, had broken her hip in class. I could see the man through the window. He was going to the playground. I was scared. So I looked over at my friend Chewbacca and tapped him on the shoulder. "I'm trying to study," he says. I point out the man. Whatever, Chewbacca replied. At recess, me and my friend talked. I saw the man, he walked up to us. I got up. I forgot my lunchbox, I say. In my last class, ELA, my teacher, Mrs. I Fart Rainbows and I Hate You. It was pretty uneventful. But I would like to point out the first student who ever died at our school. It was a disease. I felt almost angry at the man. I don't know why, but I did. When I got out of school, I'd had a club meeting, so it was 5 instead of 3:30. The man approached me. How old are you, Cheesy Wheezy? The man said in an angry tone. Who are you, I say. I'm your uncle, Billy Bob Joe, he says. Note I live with my great-aunt and uncle, and I am very close to all my great-aunt's brothers. My uncle only has one brother, who wasn't this. My birth mom had one sister, and my birth dad doesn't have any siblings. My friend Rainbow Toot's dad pulled up. I ran up to his car. I breathed on the window and wrote help. He let me in. I told him my story. He brought me home. Later that night, there was a knock on the door. It was Billy Bob Joe. I'm looking for Cheesy Wheezy. She ran off on me. He laughs. My uncle closed the door. We called the cops. He was found and arrested. 4. I need to start this story with a little preface, a little background, and an apology as it may be on the long side compared to similar submissions. I'm picking this particular experience out of a time frame that lasted for a cumulative total of 8 years. I say cumulative because I actually lived in this house on 2 separate occasions, but purely by coincidence. Or at least I thought it was coincidence. I don't live there any longer, and looking back, I'm convinced that the house called me back as if it wasn't done tormenting me, my family, and my friends. Every week of every year I lived in that house was terrifying, to say the least. This experience takes place during my second stint in the house. Also a little apology if this story sounds like it's ripped straight from a horror movie, but I can assure you that it's all true. This particular experience in total spans roughly a year and a half, and involves myself, Jamie my wife, George and Lily our upstairs neighbors, my old roommate Kevin, my best friend Travis and his wife Julie. The 2011 house is a large farmhouse and is one of the oldest structures in town. It's roughly 120 years old. For the last couple decades it's been used as 2 apartments, the first floor and second floor. It's in the middle of a bustling town with many popular places to eat, drink, and has a nice music scene. It isn't some backwoods, middle-of-nowhere shack. It's only a 7-minute drive from the downtown area of a major city. I won't give you a detailed history of the place, but needless to say, it has a long, jaded, destructive, and violent past that has it infected. When this experience first started, I was living on the first floor with Kevin, and it had been almost a year and a half-dozen people moving in and out of the second-floor apartment before our landlord finally found a nice married couple that loved the place, George and Lily. They were sweet enough, and kind of kept to themselves, whereas Kevin and I were night owls and loved to stay up late, drinking, playing video games, etc. For the first 6 months they lived upstairs, we were convinced they hated us because Lily was awake before sunrise to leave for work, and we weren't the quietest of drunks. We also thought she had OCD because at least a few days every week she would move all, and I mean all, of her furniture around and run the vacuum cleaner across the entire apartment. The house was old, and there wasn't hardly a lick of insulation in the place, especially between our ceilings, their floor. She walked very heavily and slid the furniture with determination. It was assumed she was doing it to pay us back for being so loud at night. This routine went on until Kevin moved into his girlfriend's place. After that, my place wasn't so loud, and neither was theirs. I lived without a roommate for a while, and in that time, became good friends with Lily and semi-good friends with George. It wasn't long before Lily told me that she loved all things paranormal. She was Wiccan, and she was already having experiences in their place. I told her I wasn't surprised. My first stint in that house was almost 2 years in the second floor apartment. Lily was a passionate collector of decorative hat boxes, and one of the first experiences that she told me about was that she talked her husband into letting her use their master bedroom closet to store and display the 24 or more hat boxes she had. At the time she told me this, it had been the 3rd time she came home from work on a day George actually had to go into the office, and every one of her hat boxes was torn from the closet, lids open and thrown all over the room, but like I said, it didn't really bother her. If anything, she enjoyed it. Weird, right? I hate this term, but fast forward about 8 months later. My now current wife had moved in with me a couple months before, and one night, Travis and Julie were over having some drinks. It was a rare occasion that Lily and George both joined us all on the wraparound front porch for some fun, but that night they did. It was one of the few times we were all together like that. Of course, we got on the subject of the paranormal. We never brought up any specific examples of what happened in the house. Just put out the general vibe that it was haunted. George is, well, was, a hardcore skeptic, and Julie is sort of a scaredy cat. But we talked for hours about chills and thrills. Travis was so fascinated with the possibility of the house being haunted that, a few days later, he did some research online about the place, only to find some really good stuff. Let me state this now. Lily and George never exchanged contact info with Travis and Julie. They were just 2 sets of our friends that happened to hang out together, very rarely and only with us. They never talked to one another if we weren't there. I need to say that because the next part sounds like it could easily be made up. So I got Travis a job working with me, and one Monday, after our weekly meeting, he pulled me aside as we lit a couple cigs and told me of the things he'd found. The first thing nearly made me want to cry and call bullshit on him. But knowing that he had no idea what happened, how could it be? Apparently, according to his findings, the first family that lived in that house was very wealthy, and the lady of the house used half of the second story to teach school. Desks, chalkboard, the whole nine. Also, she was an avid maker and buyer of elegant hats. You know, those big hats that were all the style 100 years ago. She had the entire attic area furnished to use as her hat room, as Travis called it. I literally got chills typing those words. I could have been the only one that told him what happened to Lily's hat boxes, but I swear that I never did, until after he told me what he found. I relayed Lily's hatbox experience to him, and his eyes started to water, and he got visible goosebumps. He went on to tell me that the lady of the house killed herself by dragging a school desk all the way from what is now the second floor living room, down the hall and up into the attic, where she hung herself. I instantly made the connection between what Kevin and I thought was Lily's obsession with vacuuming to what he just told me. But I had to know for sure. The next time I caught Lily outside, we were drinking a bit of wine, and just bullshitting when I subtly brought it up, by making some joke about how much she hated Kevin, because he was always taking her parking spot, and then told her how he thought she was OCD, because she was constantly moving their furniture and cleaning all the time. She damn near spit out her wine in surprise and guaranteed me that none of that had ever happened. I sort of laughed it off, but she was adamant. So much so that she made me go upstairs with her. Right then and there, she showed me a thick layer of dirt, cat hair and dust that had accumulated under their furniture. It was a half-inch thick. Almost 2 years of dirt. She assured me that all the furniture was in the exact same spot it was the day they moved in. I felt sick. I still couldn't totally believe that Travis had simply found that info online, and that we, in our drunken state, didn't let it slip somehow. I was skeptical of his source, but that doesn't change the fact that what Kevin and I were hearing was definitely not what we thought it was. A few more months go by and Travis tells me something else he found out that made me believe him with all my being. According to his research, during the 1960s, I believe, after the house had been transformed into 8 individual apartments, somehow, one of the residents committed suicide by running a warm bath in the second-floor tub and slitting their wrists. I thought that was pretty messed up, a little believable, and a lot creepy. But I thought it was just that, a story. That was until towards the end of the timeline I'm including this story, in which Jamie and I were woken up by a series of text messages from Lily at around midnight. The first message, something like, "If you see an ambulance in the driveway soon, everything is under control. Sorry to wake you." What the hell? We both said to each other. Did we need to help them somehow? We were freaking out. The next message said, "I wouldn't come up here if I were you. Just know I'm okay, and George is okay now." The final message was a picture text of their bathroom, blood splattered. It was running down the tub drain, peppered on the curtain and smeared on their white tiled floor. It was sent with the message, "George tried to kill himself tonight in the tub. I bandaged him, cleaning now. We'll keep in touch." Jamie and I started crying. I had told her what Travis told me not a week or so before, and it was smacking us in the face as we sat on our bed together in the dark. George ended up recovering from that, but has developed some other serious medical ailments. Many ailments that an EVP voice basically admitted to causing, by the way. He and Lily still live in the second floor of that house. Jamie and I moved out almost 3 years ago, almost 6 months after that event took place. Lily is trying to work with the landlord to buy the place for some reason. There literally isn't a day that goes by that I don't think about that place and all the crazy shit I've seen there. It's haunted. There's something evil there, and it terrifies me to this day. Any and every time I hear a bump in the night at our current home, my mind immediately goes back to that place, and I feel sick. Five. I have a 4-year-old daughter, and this past October we took her on her first Disney Universal Studios trip to Florida. I listen to YouTube scary stories pretty much every night, and since I'm also naturally paranoid, I'm very diligent about keeping track of everyone who stares at or tries to speak to my baby girl. She is a very happy and friendly child, so keeping track of her is not always easy. However, she was luckily unaware of the events that took place at Universal Studios last fall. Our vacation took place during the big hurricane, when Disney and Universal actually shut down for a day, which never happens. So our day at Universal was blissfully free of crowds, since they were closing early. We were spending time in the Dr. Seuss area of the park, and my daughter announced she had to pee, so we headed to the closest restroom. There were 5 of us, me, my daughter, my husband, my mom, and my stepdaughter. Outside of the restroom was a small flower garden, surrounded by a high wall that we stood by while waiting for my stepdaughter, after the rest of us had finished. My daughter was standing on top of it having a snack. Once the stepdaughter emerged, we stood and talked for a few minutes. We were literally the only ones in the area, until an older man came and sat on the wall, about 3 feet from where my daughter was standing. Way too close, considering there was about 30 feet of wall that was completely empty. My antennae went up immediately. He was probably in his 50s, looked to be from India. I watched him like a hawk as he looked over at my 4-year-old daughter and proceeded to stare, looking her up and down like a piece of meat. I glanced around at the group, and they were all oblivious. Catching my mom's eye, I waved my head toward the guy, and she saw what he was doing. She looked back at me, clearly unnerved. We both watched as he continued staring at my child, the look in his eyes lustful and predatory. I was ready to pounce on him, if he so much as reached out a hand or attempted to speak to her. But then a teenage girl came out of a nearby gift shop, and he stood up and followed behind her. My mom and I continued watching as he caught up to her, and they began talking, so we assumed they were together. He never looked back. I have listened to countless pedophile stories, but this was the first time I had witnessed it firsthand. The way a grown man was looking at my daughter was not normal. I worried about the girl he was with as well, on the off chance that they weren't actually together. Just to clarify, this all took place in the span of about 5 minutes or less. My apologies if anything is unclear, and I welcome any questions or comments. Thanks for listening. Hey everyone, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 5 True Scary Subscriber Stories, episode 35. And thank you very much to everyone who sent their stories in for use in this video. If you yourself have a story you would like me to read, providing of course it is your story, then please do send it in, and you can find the email address by clicking on Show More on the description of any video and scrolling down to the bottom, and you can also see it, if you're looking at the screen, on the screen right now with the rest of my contact information. Only stipulations are, you must be at least 16 years old to send a story in. If you are younger than 16, just ask your parent or your guardian if it's alright if you send this story in to me. That's the only request I made. I'll take your word for it, but I do have to ask that you follow those rules. Don't want letters from angry parents. Thankfully I've not gotten any, but I don't want to get any. That's just something I've been meaning to say for a while. Okay, and with that I think I'm going to head off for now, so until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.